Till about 30 years ago, most people regarded agriculture as something special. Then came the introduction of a lot of sort of market economy ideas.
One city, such as Bristol or Oxford.
We're bringing everybody together, the farmers, the cooks, the scientists, the economists, politicians.
Into really change the farming landscape.
The Oxford Real Farming Conference is the antidote to the official Oxford Farming Conference. And the official Oxford Farming Conference, held in Oxford every year, tells the world that industrial farming is good and the governments, the people who are in charge ought to be in charge and they're doing the right things and so on and so on. In fact, of course, the world's agriculture is in a disastrous state and so is the world as a result. So we 3 years ago started the Oxford Real Farming Conference to say exactly how farming ought to be run and why it cannot continue to be run by the people who are now running it. What industrial farming is it's basically there to make lots and lots of money. It is not there, this sounds childish and all that kind of stuff, but actually it's literally the case. It is not there primarily to grow good food to feed people. It is not there primarily to look after the land, to look after the soil, not there primarily to make sure that animals, don't suffer, or to make sure that there's plenty of jobs for farmers, which is what all industries should do, they should employ people. Not there for any of those things. It's there to make a lot of money for the companies that actually control agriculture. Companies like Dow and Monsanto and Syngenta and Bayer. We have that agriculture now. It actually feeds only 30% of the world's people. 70% are fed by traditional agriculture, but feeds 30% of the people. It nevertheless attracts, it must be at least 90% of all the funding, much of it paid for by us, in the way of subsidies and research funds and all the rest of it. It leaves 1 billion people out of 7 billion chronically undernourished, and another billion, as we all know, are obese and diabetic and all the rest of it. And we're told that by 2050, they tell us that by 2050, when the world population will be 9 billion, that we need to increase food supply by another 50%, and they say that it can only be done by these industrial means, more chemicals, bigger scale, GM, genetically modified, genetically engineered crops in order to give higher yields, all that kind of stuff. It's all an air of panic, it's all an air of hype, it's all a question of producing more and more and more, and it's not aimed at producing good food well, it's aimed at making lots of money.
What I would say is that we need to think differently about agriculture, and we need to think differently about economics. If you think differently about economics, it means first of all getting the proper measuring devices for assessing whether you have a healthy society or a society that is totally captivated by notions about the market. There never has been a free market, there's not one nowadays, and there never will be one. All governments have to regulate markets, and they have to decide what the public interest is. The public interest, of course, in all cases is that there should be food for people to eat and energy for them to draw upon. And so governments have that big responsibility of ensuring those two things. And that means you have to think differently about economics. You get away from some of the current conventional attitudes and look towards something more radical.
We want very complicated farming, we want very, very diverse farming, so that there's plenty of leeway. Do you know what I mean? Plenty of resilience. One thing dies, another thing flourishes. Everything feeds into everything else. There's no waste. You want low input farming, which largely means you want organic farming. If you're going to farm like this very complicated low input systems, you want lots and lots of labour, lots of skilled labour. You want to get rid of your farmers, you want more and more farmers. If you go down that route the very complex labour intensive farms, there's really no advantage to scale up. So you finish up saying you actually want small to medium sized farms. So if you think about the problem as a matter of biology, how we're going to produce enough food for all the people, and a matter of morality, do we really want to feed all that people? You finish up with the idea that you need small, complicated, labour-intensive, quasi-organic farms. If you go down the industrial route, you finish up with the exact opposite. Huge monocultures, maximum input, maximum machinery, minimum labour.
If you look at a wheat crop, in terms of the energy inputs, we might immediately assume that the energy involved in putting it into a wheat crop is is just simply things like tractor diesel for ploughing the fields, or and drying the wheat when it's harvested. But actually over half of the energy that goes into a wheat crop actually is energy that goes into the production of nitrogen fertilizer. And so some of the stuff we talk about is how one can get farm systems which build up fertility and nutrients without such a reliance on artificial sources of nitrogen fertilizer. So nitrogen fertilizer uses a lot of natural gas to produce it. So if you had a 300 hectare wheat farm, it would require around about the equivalent of 1,000 barrels of oil a year to produce the wheat off it. And half of that would be in the form of natural gas going into producing artificial nitrogen fertilizer, and that's a huge amount of energy, but it's also a huge cost risk for the farmer. Just the energy for the nitrogen fertilizer it fluctuates a lot. The price of gas fluctuates a lot, but that can be anything between 10 and 30,000 pounds worth of energy as one part of one input into a wheat crop. So large amounts.
How you change things, well, there's lots of ways. One thing that I like is the idea of is ethical investment. Again, a capitalist mechanism whereby people at large invest in small farms, which can be profitable if they're made to work properly. You need this thing called community-supported agriculture, where communities decide to take over farms, and there's lots of examples of that actually farmed by the community themselves, or the community employs local farmers virtually on salary to grow for them. So the small farmer is supported, he is secure or she is secure, and the community gets good local food. All the time you're cutting out these huge, ludicrous retail chains, where food goes all over the world and is sent to the north to be packaged and sent back again, and all that kind of stuff. Cut out all the middle people. Cut out all the middle people, you cut out about 80% of the cost of food. So it's a big thing to do. And you just want more and more of these groups growing up. I reckon all around the country, they are growing up. And in other countries, America, Australia, these kind of movements are very strong. And what one is looking for is it's called a critical mass. You don't have to persuade, as it were, or induce the majority of a population to change its ways in order to produce a radical change. You just need enough to start making a difference.
A lot depends, I think, on your assumptions about what's going to happen in the future. I mean, at present, energy prices are cheap and labour is dear, so that tends to sort of push farmers in the direction of more and more mechanisation and larger scale. But I mean, I think, and also, there are biodiversity issues in terms of, whether the sorts of ways that we're farming now are going to be sustainable in the long run. But, if energy prices increase, the sort of worries that we have about climate change as well, depending on how you read the future, I think, there could be good scope for more small-scale mixed farming to sort of come back into the picture in the future.
The Chinese have rather a good word for it. They call it clean green growth in Mandarin. Clean green growth means taking account of things like externalities, or in other words, the effects of the market on how people live, whether they're healthy, whether they live happy lives. Indeed, you have to spread the whole concept right across to happiness and good health and good community spirit, and that, of course, involves agriculture directly, because people have to be able to know where their food is coming from and how they're going to pay for it. So agriculture fits into this, but it means that we need to think again about a great many things in the way we haven't yet done.
There's no doubt about it. It can be, hard work, and when you're sort of out in all weathers in the mud and so on. But having had office jobs previously, it's easy to forget what a privilege it is to be sort of outdoors, interacting with nature, really trying to figuring out. You're right at the sort of at the interface of human society, producing food for people, and but interacting with the sort of the natural ecology. So that's a real privilege.
What side are the powers that be on? Government, etc., etc. Industry, they're on the side, obviously, of the industrial scale agriculture. That is what the Oxford Farming Conference is about and what it's there to promote. We are saying no, we want agriculture that actually feeds people. What I call enlightened agriculture, which is completely different.